why they're cool. So yeah, who am I? Who is me? I am Heather. I've just graduated from the University of Edinburgh with a bachelor's in ecology and environmental sciences management. I currently work for Paths for All, which is Scotland's walking charity. So they do work encouraging people to walk and get exercise and get out in the environment, all that green energy stuff. As well, and also this summer I gained a job with David Dodds where I did seasonal ecology work, which is where I gained my passion for bat surveys and things like that. So yeah, so why bats? Why bats? Are they even important? So bats play a vital role in our ecosystems around the world and provide loads of ecosystem services. So animals and plants and things like that can do stuff to our environment that basically improve different functions within the environment. So bats play a crucial role in some of those as listed on the screen. So pollination. Bats help in the pollination of over 500 plants around the world. Key plants like mangoes and bananas and agave. So yeah, they're pretty important for the food that we eat, and yeah. They also help with seed dispersal. So if you've got forests that have been deforested, a lot of bat activity will help regrowth the forest, which is really important. And also pest control. So lots of bats, I think around 70% of them eat insects, so that's good for keeping population control of insects down, and also is a natural pesticide, which is really good because pesticides not only impact bat populations but other wildlife and other functions around farming and things like that. So pesticides are a short-term benefit for farming but can also cause further detriments down the line. So bats are a good natural solution to that. But they are currently under threat. Most bat populations have suffered severe declines in the past century due to loads of things like habitat loss. So the loss of hedgerows around the UK has definitely impacted UK bat populations, along with pesticide use, climate change and disease. Yeah, so they are pretty important, I would say. So yeah, just some fun little facts. All British bats are insectivores, so they all catch insects. They do that through three main ways. So hawking, which is just in the air. Gleaning, which is off vegetation. So again, loss of forest is really important for their hunting activities. And also they find their roosts in forests as well. So yeah, so vegetation is really important for them. And also gaffing, which is off water, which I didn't realize until I was writing this talk, which I think is a pretty cool term for it. So bats use echolocation to locate their prey and fly at night. So they basically send out a call, and then they make a mental mind map of a complex picture of the environment to go hunt their prey in. So yeah, I'm currently out of a bat job because they're all asleep right now, hibernating. So I won't have a new job until May when they wake up. But yeah, so they sometimes can come out in warmer weather during the colder seasons, but it's really inconsistent for doing surveys if you're guessing when they're going to come out. So we tend not to work during the winter months. But in spring, warmer weather means the bats come back again, and they gather in little groups. So in the summer, the females gather together in what we call maternity roosts. So they'll all gather together to have their babies, which is quite sweet. And the males go off to their bachelor pad. Yep. And then in the autumn, mating season occurs, and then as the weather gets colder again, they'll separate off into little groups and go hibernate again. So yeah. Legal protection of bats. So all bats are protected and are classified as European protected species. So disturbing or destroying a bat roost is a criminal offence without a licence granted. So that is £5,000 per bat or per incident, depending on which is more severe, and can be up to 6 months in prison. So please don't go around knocking down bat roosts. You don't want to go to prison, basically. Licenses are only provided if 3 tests are met. So if it's absolutely necessary for the bat's safety to be moved, if there's if it's deemed that this is the only way to get rid of them, and if you set up mitigation. So often you'll hear people talk about mitigation strategies. So if they only need to fix part of a roof, they can mitigate that part that needs fixed so the bats can still live in the other part but aren't disturbed or get hurt by the work happening in the other side of the house, basically. So yeah, if they do need to be totally removed though, people will make bat roosts and things like that in the natural environment so they can move to provide them an extra home. So to also disturb bats or for scientific research is a criminal offence. And as long as, so I personally, because I don't hold a NatureScott bat license, I can't go and handle a bat. And also because I don't have a rabies vaccine, because I don't really want rabies. So I can't do that. And part of, I believe, the licensing is actually going and getting a rabies vaccine for your own protection. So yeah, but if you do hold that license, then you can do things like proper capture of bats if necessary. So yeah, I was going to make you guess, but I forgot that part of the talk. So there are technically 18, but legally, there are 17. And because of that, if you see, most of these bats are in alphabetical order, apart from the greater mouse ear bat down at the right-hand bottom side. And that's because there's no mating roosts found for many years. So if there's no maternal roosts, that means they're not breeding within the UK. So technically they aren't, they don't have enough survival characteristics and things like that to have a proper population within the UK. So there's been the occasional sighting over the past few years, but there's no maternal roosts being found, so they don't technically live here, which is sad. But they're really cute. Look at that little guy. So I included him. But yeah, so these are bats across the UK, and yeah. So does anyone want to guess how many bats there are in Scotland, which is where I do my surveying? So Scotland tends to be a little bit of a colder climate, a little bit harsher. So there are only 10 species found within Scotland. So please ask me about these bats and not the other bats, because I have limited knowledge about the English bats. I'm happy to talk about them and be like, whoa, they are bats, but my knowledge on them is a little bit lesser, let's say. But yeah, so these are the bats found within Scotland. So using my technologies, that I'll talk about later. I basically monitor them around the borders to the east side and the west side and up into like Perthshire area. We don't really go up into the Highlands just because that's a bit far away for getting there and driving and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's where I survey. And yeah, so how do I actually do my job? So just giving a general overview. On the left-hand side, there's a site which was basically an abandoned ruin in someone's back garden, which was really cool. They just lived in this really cute little cottage, and then they just had a little castle in the back, which I thought was pretty neat. But yeah, so you can see I've got a tripod set up, and to the left there is a torch, and that's an infrared torch. And then to the right there's a camera set up, and that's an infrared camera. And then in the right-hand picture, that is a bat detector that I'm holding, and I'm holding a little clicker. And there's a little wire that goes in, and a little ear pierce. And then there was a radio, which was really handy, but someone's taken the radio, so I can't be like, this is the radio I use, because that's, yeah. But I also use a radio. So that's a general overview of what I need to do bat surveys. So infrared, I mentioned infrared a lot in the last survey, so in the last presentation, not survey. So what is infrared? So a British astronomer discovered it in the 18th century. 17th? No, 18th. Never mind. So he got a prism, held it up to the light, and saw that the color separated. And so he thought, I wonder if there's different temperatures between these. So he stuck thermometers under each color, and then he had a control thermometer outside. But he noticed that the control thermometer outside the spectrum on the red-hand side got way hotter than the other ones. And he was like, that's funny. And he'd actually discovered infrared radiation, which I think is pretty cool. And yeah, look at him, he's quite proud. He's like, I've done something. But yeah, so infrared radiation, the bottom picture on the left is when it's daytime, so that's the view through the camera without any infrared light on it, and that is the infrared on the top left when it's on. So you can see there's a much greater visibility between when it's nighttime, I wouldn't be able to see anything, so it'd be really hard to describe bat movements and where the bats are located and things like that. On a roost. So at this particular site, I'll wander over. We had 80 bats coming out of here, we had 50 bats coming out of here, and we had about 30 coming out of here. So in pitch darkness, I wouldn't be able to describe how many bats there were, because you sometimes get bats flying over you if you've been standing there for a while. Insects will gather, we all know this, we've probably been hiking, things like that, you get loads of insects gathering. So often in a survey, it's handy to have cameras to see if there's been a little bat that's really, really interested in you, or if it's loads of bats coming out the roost. So it's helpful to describe to the client what's actually going on in their roof as well. But yeah, so that's really handy, and that's another picture of when infrared's off and when infrared is on. The little red dot is when it's recording. But yeah, so the left-hand side, that's kind of like an abandoned barn area. I think it used to be a stables. And what was happening in that picture was I was getting loads of bat readings on my bat detector, which we'll talk about in a second. And I looked through the infrared camera, and there was bats circling the barn. And we were like, what's happening here? And so I was speaking to the lead on the survey, and they reckoned that the bats were basically shoehorning insects into a little like shed area, and they were eating them and then flying back around and then gathering more and pushing them in. So it was kind of cool, but obviously we wouldn't have seen that behavior without the infrared cameras, so that's really cool. So bat detectors. That's a lot of information, but the general gist of it is that bat detectors are devices that convert ultrasonic bat calls into audible sounds. So we'll see in a slide, in a few slides over, that bats' calls are way out of human hearing. You'll get like a little tiny slice that we can probably hear, but most of them are in our non-hearing range. So bat detectors help us basically listen to them. So there's a few different types. Heterodyne is just a tunable one, which is really good for identifying some species, but because you have to physically tune it yourself, you can miss bats if you're going to a new survey site. If it's a survey site where you probably know that there's going to be X species, you can tune into that frequency and then get all the bats, but if there's non-species, you'll probably miss them. Frequency division is captured in real time, and then the frequency is divided by 10 when it's recording. So this allows continuous detection throughout the night, which is really great for getting the overview of the night, but it makes a less detailed sound analysis when you're converting it into spectrograms and things like that, because of that division factor. Zero crossing is, again, recording, but it makes it into a little plot with little data points, which I think is cool. And it creates really small files, so you can have this sitting in the field. So if it's a really remote spot, you can place a little bat detector out, and then you can come back every 5 to 6 days and collect it, and it means you don't have to stand out in a really remote highland moor for ages hoping for bats, and then there's none. But yeah, again, the spectrograms are less detailed comparatively to a full spectrum or a time expansion one. So time expansion is a short sample of the sound, and then it gets played back so you can really hear the audio, which is great for recording in high detail to look at the call structure and things like that. It's really good for getting a lot of educational sounds. So when you're first learning about bat calls, you'll normally use time expansion calls because it breaks down and you can very easily see like different shapes that the different bat calls make. But unfortunately, these detectors can't detect bat calls and also do that slow down process at the same time. So if you're using it out in the field, if you're slowing down a bat call, you might miss another bat call. So you don't get a full image of what's actually out in the field. And finally, a full spectrum records sounds in real time at their original frequency. So it's the best of both worlds, or bat worlds. So you can use the frequency division, which allows you to see what the sounds are, but it also holds that recording like the time expansion one. So it's very good at collecting sounds, and then you can also visually see, so you can store it and also see it. But this takes a lot of high sampling, really detailed files. So yeah, battery and an SD card gets used up really quickly. But as you can see, the Heterodyne is probably the cheapest because it's got the less functionality, whereas as you go down the list, the more functionality, the more expensive it is. They are really expensive. Luckily no one's broken one yet, because yeah, that would be probably about £1,000 that I'm holding there every single night. But yeah, so that's what it looks like. As you can see, it lights up at night, so I can really easily see what's happening. And then that's why we've got the ear pierce, because if it's connected in, so it'll change the sonic sound into audible hearing for us. So that's why we hear it, because we can hear it, and then different bats have different ranges of calls. So you can hear it and be like, that sounds like a pipistrelle, but I don't know which one. And then I would look down at my recorder and it would be 22 hertz. That's probably going to be way out the range. Yeah, and I'll be like, that's probably a common, and I'll be able to radio over, spoiling the rest of the talk, but I'll be able to radio over to my boss being like, hi, I've just had a common pipistrelle come out the roost, and that'd be really handy for her, and she'll be able to write a note of it. But yeah. Yes, so that's the frequency calls that I've been talking about. So yeah, this is another reason why it's nice being in Scotland comparatively to England. Don't read into that too much, but because we've got less species, there's way less overlap, and we can tell the differences between the species quite easily. So if you look at the pipistrelles at the top, top 3 species, their peak frequency ranges are very quite separated. So as I was saying, you can identify it from the sound of it being like a hand clap and jazzy irregular rhythm, which probably doesn't make any sense unless you actually hear the sound and you're like, of course it is a hand clap sound or a chip chop or whatever. But then having that bat detector in front of you is really good for being able to tell the peak frequencies quite easily, and it helps, yeah. But as you can see, the bottom 3 species are all Myotis species, and their peak frequency range is quite similar, and they sound quite similar, but because these species have different habitat environments and also environmental impact conditions that they like to live in, that's why we take those measurements during the field as well, because we can be like, there's forest, it's probably this species compared to the species that hunts only on water, so it's probably not in the middle of a forest, and things like that. Yep, so that's just to show you the differences between the calls. As you can see, this amount of activity is quite unusual at a site, but I quite like this diagram to show the variety of calls that you can get. So you can see that the common and the soprano are in a higher frequency range than also the nocturnal and other Myotis species. And I've very kindly put the limit of human hearing on there. So you can see that we could probably catch the end of calls, but not a lot of the top ranges, and we could completely miss other species if we were just standing about listening for bats, which is not very scientific at all. But yeah. Radios, we kind of had a demonstration of how a radio worked before. I put in some jokes throughout the latter half of the presentation to keep the motivation up. But yeah, radios, they're really handy from the site. So they they use radio waves to communicate. So they change the radio waves into electronic signals that we can now hear as audio. So it's really useful as a site. As I explained kind of earlier, we'll have a lead on the bat survey. So a non-lead, such as myself, will be stood somewhere staring at the building for 2 hours, not moving, just looking for bats. But then the lead of the bat survey will walk around us, and then if one of us calls with the radio, hi, I've had a soprano pip come out of the roost, they'll come over and we'll be able to describe exactly where it was, and they can note it down. Instead of, they used to have a system of you would have to note down where it was in the dark while also staring and also managing your radio, and it was a whole system. But yeah, the radios make it a lot easier. It also provides a lot of safety on site. We can be in areas where there's hikers or people come up, so it's really good to have that connection to the rest of the team, even if you are in the dark by yourself, so you know that they're just there. But yeah, that's the radio. And some honorable mentions is the torch I mentioned earlier, and also the earpieces. So I mentioned that we have infrared torches on top of the tripod as well, and that just gives us some extra radiation basically to see more clearly in case it's a really dark night or it's quite cloudy or something, or there's not great visibility. It's good to just have that extra point, especially because the camera will be focusing on one direction but can capture the rest of the field of vision. So if you've got something happening on the left, then you can shine the torch to the left and that will brighten it up a little bit for the camera and the recording. But yeah, yep, so just a little bit about if you wanted to get involved. So Conservation and Nature, Bat Conservation Trust, they do a lot of work. A lot of it is free. I know that it says become a member and also donate on ways to help on the slide, but there's loads of free resources, such as when I was researching for this Bat Talk, they've got Bat Fest during this October, so there's loads of free bat events encouraging young people, but also all people of all ages to get involved with bats surveying, and I would say 95% of the talks are free and they're an hour. There's loads of things from like different their food that they eat, the different behaviors. They've got some talks about bats that aren't in the UK, which I think is really interesting and great to have a knowledge of different bats. But yeah, there's also BatLib, which I discovered a few months ago, which is basically like European bat calls, and it's really good just for hearing what different bats sound like as well. And also, because I mentioned back in the few slides ago that you shouldn't really be handling bats, I would recommend the National Bat Helpline, which I think is a good resource to have, but also if you wanted to get in contact with your local bat group, they'll have a number of someone that can look after the bats if you ever find a little bat not doing too well. But yeah. Yeah, I didn't really know what to put for the last slide, so come talk to me if you wanted. I didn't know if I would have questions or not. I was supposed to have a little script, but I've kind of ignored that. But yeah, so I didn't know how much time I'd have, I'm happy to answer questions now or afterwards, or you can contact me if you get anxious, because I've been quite anxious during the talk. But yeah, that's the end of the talk. Thank you for coming, I really appreciate it. And yeah, have a great B-side.
Stop button on there.
I can hit the stop button.
Yeah.
I was talking really fast. No.
Yeah.
Actually, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Where I live, we do get a lot of bats. What do I do when they get into the house? 'Cause
So
I've had them fly in through the window.
I would just keep an idea of where they are. If they're in a room that you can block off, I can understand if they fly into your bedroom, it's kind of an awkward situation, but if in like a kitchen or a living room or something, try just block them off, and hopefully they'll come out where they went in. Like I was saying, there should be, the Bat Conservation Trust has loads of local bat groups, so you can always phone their number, and also the national helpline, they'll be able to give you some good advice as well. But bats, once they get in a house, hopefully will leave, but I can understand that it's a little bit stressful when you're like, there's a bat inside my home. But yeah, so I'd recommend calling the national bat helpline and just kind of closing the door and letting them do their thing, because they're probably as stressed out as you are, because they're like, I'm in a house now, I don't know what to do, type thing. But yeah, they're not. Yeah, same thing with spiders. They're probably equally as scared as you are as it. So just try to give it some space. That's my recommendation. But yeah.
Yeah, we get plenty of bats flying around in the garden in the evenings. Spring, summer evenings. How do we encourage them, make their habitat better?
Oh, that's a really good question. I should have mentioned that on the past slide, but I shall go back. The Bat Conservation Trust, I didn't look into it too much because I didn't know if there would be a question on it, but if you Google gardening for bats, within the Bat Conservation Trust, they've got a whole article about how to make your garden more friendly for bats. I think there's a lot of encouraging bat plants. So bees, not obviously, but bees look for like bright colored plants, but at night the bats don't really see that color, so they'll pollinate different plants that the bees might miss. So it's probably planting more bat friendly plants, if that makes sense. But yeah, I definitely recommend going onto the Bat Conservation Trust, and they've got definitely an article, because I saw it while researching this. But yeah, I think it's called Gardening for Bat Friendly Garden or something, or Bat Friendly Gardens or something. But yeah, they've got some resources on it as well.
Brilliant, thanks.
Of course.
Well done. Any more questions? Fabulous.